All right. Well, welcome to the Greenfield Forum we have here tonight. I'm Tammy Thompson. I'll be your moderator for this evening. I want to thank you all for coming and choosing to be such a valuable and active part of the community. It's really nice to see all of you here. I ask that we all agree to refrain from personal attacks, profanity, speaking out of turn, or the forcing of ideas. This will aid in an informative and successful forum. And if everyone agrees with that, can you just all say aye? Aye. Thanks, guys. I'd like to thank the candidates for their presence and their passion that they offer to this community. And we will begin with their opening statements. I would like to introduce each candidate. Roxanne in the green, Sheila, and Brickett. And I'm sure most of you are familiar. Roxanne, can we just go in order?
Well, you can, because we all drew cards. I hope this isn't cutting into my time.
No.
We all drew cards, and I came up with the ace. First time in my life. First time. Well, okay. Did you hear that?
I just want to mention one more thing. Can we just silence our phones?
Good. Okay. So, good evening. I'm very happy that I was able to change my previous commitment in order to be here with Brickett and Sheila. And I'm here to talk about the future of Greenfield. I'm in this race because as mayor, I want to keep Greenfield moving forward. To me, that means we build on our successes, and we've had a few, and we make a concerted effort to grow our tax base, to continue to increase revenue streams, and that's all in order to stabilize our tax rate. I believe that my 22 years of experience on the school committee and on the planning board gives me the broad experience that's needed to be an executive officer of a $50 million municipality. Economic development and education are two of the things that make Greenfield work.
So my name is Sheila Gilmore, and I'm running for mayor because I feel like Greenfield needs to move in a new direction. I feel like I come in with different types of experience. I served for 8 years in the military as a Russian linguist and an intelligence analyst before moving into compliance management, where I evaluated programs for my commander and was assigned to a team where I worked on protecting Americans' Fourth Amendment rights from illegal search and seizure during military intelligence operations. After I left the military, I came here to Western Massachusetts, and I started working on my master's degree in public policy down at UMass Amherst. And shortly after graduation, I joined the city council, and now I'm sitting here. I'm interested in bringing in more transparency and accountability, and I want to reevaluate some of the systems that we have in place, some of the processes, and make sure that things are working as efficiently as possible so that we're still getting all of the best services that we have.
Hello, I'm Brickett Alice. Many of you know who I am. I have been a lifelong resident of Greenfield. I was born, raised, and educated here. And I joined this race for mayor because I believe the city needs to find its way and be able to get exactly and all of the things that it needs versus those which we just want to have. I believe the needs of this community are infrastructure. I believe the needs of this community are funding the departments to a level which is necessary for them to operate and provide the services that they're supposed to provide. This race to me is not about politics, it's about public service. I've been in public service now for 19 of my 38 years, so exactly half of my life has been dedicated and devoted to serving this community. And I'm hoping that all of you voters will see fit to write me in on the 5th of November.
Thank you. We're going to begin. I'll be reading questions. Each candidate will answer the question. You have, I believe, 3 minutes to answer. We will start
Same order.
same
Oh.
order.
Okay, all the way through, just so I know.
I think we should change the order as we go.
Okay,
And we'll just go down, you'll start, then
all right.
next time you'll start. Okay, our first question is, what role does the mayor play in the budgeting process, and how would you approach this?
Well, the budgeting process, which will have already begun by January when whoever is elected takes over, is begun by the mayor. He sends out to the departments and says, give us your budget for the coming year. This is going to be an abbreviated version, but give us your budgets for the coming year. And from then on, it goes through its process. At some point, the mayor takes all that information in and creates the mayor's budget. So from then, and again, as I say, it's just a little bit of an abbreviated version of how it happens, but from there it goes to the town council. So, and proceeds on through the process. So in the vetting of the budget to create the mayor's budget, I believe I would take a look at each and every department, having already had conversations with them to try to get to understand where they can trim and what their most significant needs are for the coming year and perhaps beyond, because we also create a capital budget. And from there, I will have to use my best judgment based on what I know about the financial position that we're in, whatever that may be, in order to craft a budget that we can then present to the council, and it goes on from there. I leave it in the capable hands of councilors for a short while.
So I don't want to go too far into the process, because that's already been sort of outlined for us, but I think that it's important when the mayor sends the budget out, when we've got that first draft, I think it's important to see what sort of things have been cut, because I think that if the community disagrees with those cuts, then they should have a chance to weigh in on that. And also, as a city councilor, I've always been curious what the first draft looked like coming from the department heads, so that I know how we got to the position that we're in. So I think that it would be helpful for people to have community forums. I know that people are very concerned about how expensive some of these projects are. There was one project in particular that I was told was going to cost a lot more money than I ever would have thought. So having the department head explain to me, this is why it's so expensive, I think it sort of demystifies the budget, and then people understand what it is that they're getting for their tax dollars, and that they, and they can see how, oh, well, if it costs this much to do, this particular project, then it makes more sense moving forward when, you have something that does look very expensive. People should have a realistic view of why that is and what could be trimmed if they wanted that to be trimmed.
So we've heard about the budget process, and I don't want to belabor that point, but I believe it's the mayor's job to be able to craft a budget that takes into account everything that's needed within a department, and then go back and look at it and bring in, prior to submitting to the city council, the Ways and Means Committee, if not just the Ways and Means chairperson. I served on the Ways and Means Committee, and that, by virtue of the chairmanship of that committee, you sit on the Capital Improvements Committee, which is separate from the operating budget, but it's an important piece because that committee sits and goes through and prioritizes each and every capital need and looks at them both separately and together so that you can see the whole picture. And I think that's something that really should happen with the operating budget as well. And that's something that, as mayor, I believe would be necessary and would also be helpful to do. So the buck stops with the mayor. We all know that, and the mayor is the head of the city. All the department heads report to the mayor, and it's very, very necessary to have open and transparent dialogue between the city council, the mayor, and the department heads. And that's something that we had been lacking in the past few years. And I believe while sometimes cuts are made, in my opinion, when I made cuts or when I suggested making cuts, that those cuts were suggested with the best interests of the citizens and the taxpayers, and that those cuts made sense where they were made at the time. So each year is a new year. As one of my opponents said, the first year is sort of an abbreviated year because that process has already started. But that doesn't mean that the person who is elected mayor can't go in and get back in with each of the departments, meet with each of them, and really truly drill down the needs of each department and make sure that the needs are being met before we spend money on things that are not necessarily necessary. So, thank you.
Our next question, or you would like to respond?
I just wanted to add that,
Responses.
yes, I just wanted to add that I always want to, as mayor, I always want to be mindful of the fact that that the budget doesn't just affect town departments or the executive office. It really ultimately affects the taxpayer. And so we have to budget with that in mind, and keeping in mind what the taxpayer is capable of handling. And so every step of the way, there will be communication to the taxpayer of where we're at in the budgeting process. And if we see some things that need to be communicated as important pieces of information that may or may not affect the tax rate, we would be totally transparent on that respect.
I can move on.
You all set? You want to speak?
I'm happy to move on.
Okay.
If I may add one thing. One of the most important pieces of crafting a budget is to make sure that when you look at what your tax levy capacity is, that you make sure that you're able to raise those funds either by outside revenue or by increasing the tax rate, because those are essentially the two ways that you can use more of your tax levy than you used in the previous year. Also, new growth, but new growth is up in the air typically. It's budgeted based on the last year's number. So you always need to be mindful of the tax levy, because anytime you move into a higher tax levy, typically you have to do one of those three things to make sure that you have enough money to pay for it.
Thank you. And Jill, you'll start this round. Not taking into account any additional revenue from non-tax sources, if you have to make a decision, where do you fall on the axis of prioritizing preserving city services versus prioritizing the prevention of tax increases? Do you
I'm
want
sorry,
me to
could-
repeat it?
Please.
Condensed, it says, I'll reword it. Where do you fall on the axis of prioritizing preserving city services versus prioritizing the prevention of tax increases? So which is your, yeah?
So I think that it's very important that we preserve services for our residents. I think if we're talking about a very extreme increase, then that would have to be reevaluated. So without having the numbers in front of me, it's difficult to sort of make a decision. In theory, I feel like people pay taxes to live here, and they expect that their water is going to be clean, they expect that their trash is going to get picked up, they expect that if they have children in schools, that their schools are going to be well-funded, and these are things that people expect for the money that they pay. So if we're cutting services and still paying the same amount, I feel like people would often receive less value for their dollars. But again, if it's a very steep increase, then that's something that we would have to evaluate, and we would have to look and see exactly what these increases are coming from.
So broadly on the subject, I believe that the citizens and the taxpayers expect to pay taxes. We all expect that we have to pay taxes. It has been stated that I have suggested that I will lower taxes, which is not anything that I ever said. I said I would try to stabilize, and I would promise to do my best to be able to lessen the increase year over year. Because taxes are inevitable. We have to pay them. So what I believe residents and taxpayers want is to know that their tax money and what they're paying in taxes is being spent reasonably and responsibly. So if it comes down to a situation where you have to cut a service to keep taxes low, that's a value judgment that the community should be making through their electing a mayor and electing councilors. So I think that the two, whether we cut services to keep the taxes low or whether we raise the taxes to keep the services high, it comes to a value judgment, and it comes down to how much can the city really afford and what should we do to make sure that it's affordable for the residents. Sometimes there are services that get cut because you just can't raise the taxes that much. What I am hoping that we don't get into is spending too much at once to the point where down the road, that long-term picture is no longer as rosy as it is currently. And that is something that we need to look at very carefully, specifically in this election, to make sure that we don't max ourselves out to the point where 4, 5, 6, 8 years down the road, an emergency comes up or something like an infrastructure issue that has to be dealt with, can't be dealt with without that spike in taxes. So I believe that being fiscally responsible and making sure that what we do now is the most responsible thing going from now through infinity, that what we're doing makes sense and that we can fund that, and it is a fiscally reasonable way to go. So that I don't believe that it's necessarily a question always about one or the other. It's a question of making sure people know what's going on.
So, as we know, taxes are the price you pay for living in a livable city. So I suspect each and every one of you want to know that your roads are going to get plowed, your trash is going to get picked up, and we're very lucky. We do all of those things very well, and your kids are going to get educated. So what I want to keep in mind when I'm weighing services, cutting services versus, it's been a long time since you asked that question, but I get the gist of it, is I never want to cut a service that actually brings in revenue, like our building inspections department, our health department, those types of things. So we have to come to some agreement as to what the balance of that might be. I think that we all must recognize that budgeting in a municipality is a balancing act. So we have to do our finances in a fiscally sustainable way so that we are budgeting within the law, and there are laws that we have to follow, that we are budgeting so that we protect our revenue sources outside of our property taxes, and we have many of those, and that we at the end of the day, craft a budget that we can all live with, and hopefully we don't have to sacrifice hugely for in order to have a quality of life that we really do all enjoy here in Greenfield for the most part.
Thank you. Yes.
I'd just like to tag on, having thought about this question a little more and trying to imagine different scenarios where we might be tempted to cut services. I think that if it ever, whatever comes down the pike, I think if we're having these community conversations, I remember when a couple of years ago, they were talking about privatizing trash pickup, and there were forums about it, and people came out and they spoke, and they said that they wanted to keep this in the public sector. They did not want this to be privatized. So I think having those discussions and listening to people weigh in and letting them know, okay, if you want to keep this public, that means taxes are going to go up, and they're going to go up by this much. Is this what we all agree on? And build some consensus from there. I think that's, the best way to sort of handle those sort of decisions.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that, too. I can't think of a scenario right now in which privatization is a good idea. So understand that I think at the end of the day, we have excellent departments, we provide good services, and as long as we protect them and care for them, I'd rather keep that local. I'd rather make sure that we have the ability to provide those services within our means and within the resources, human resources in particular, that we have.
I tend to agree that typically the city municipality can provide services in a cheaper fashion than a privatized situation with a private company, just because of the overhead that private companies have and the profits they have to make. But what it really comes down to on a whole with this question and with this issue is whether you're rich or poor, you want to know that your tax money that you're paying is being spent wisely. You don't have to have a lot of money. If you have a ton of money, you want to make sure that that money is going where it's supposed to go and it's going in the most reasonable, efficient, effective manner.
Thank you. All right, our next question. It has been stated the proposed library conforms with a city of our size. Do you agree with this statement?
That's like a yes or no question, but I guess I can expound. I believe that this particular project does not conform with what our city needs. I believe that this particular library project is too big for our city, and I believe that there's too many things that have not been thought out. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the library itself. I'm talking about the other issues that having a new library with this plan causes, which is the fire department will need to be moved. And it will need to be moved prior to a new building being finished, a fire department building. We don't know the cost of a new fire department. We don't have the size of a new fire department. We know what we need because we have a study from 2012 that states what we need for the size of our fire department. It's 26,000 square feet. But we don't have any plan that comes close to that size building being built. Further, the siting of the fire department is on a site that has a lot of issues, and it's on a site that was picked very quickly after the public safety complex was not built on Main and Wells Street. So the issue is that the planning around the rest of the things that happen when the library is built has not been well thought out, and it has not been true planning process, in my opinion. So I also believe that the library of 26,000 square feet, almost 27,000 square feet, is just too big. If you look at the pictures of the new library next to the old library, it's absolutely monstrous. And I look at it and I just cannot see that is a necessary size for a library in our community. And that's a judgment that every single person has to make for themselves. People have said, "Oh no, you're wrong." Well, it's my opinion, and it's what I think it should. I think it should be smaller. That's my opinion, and if I was in charge, I would try to make sure that we could get a library that is more reasonable in cost and reasonable in size for our community. Thank you.
Okay. Well, the short answer is yes, I think it's a reasonable size. And in addition to that, it's a reasonable size because it's not just a library for our city. It's a library for the county at the end of the day, because we are the county seat. And I think there's been numbers that have been put out very recently as to who uses the library. And it's not just people from Greenfield. That said, I guess it's probably not unheard of for me to say I'm diametrically in opposition to some of the things that Councilor Alice has said, in that, quite frankly, the library project has been planned over a number of years, and many times people had an opportunity to have their say in that, and apparently chose not to until the end of the line. The numbers that we have, and actually the 26,000 square feet is smaller than the original plan for that, for the very reason that every square foot costs more money. So at the outset, it's going to be smaller than the original need was planned for. As regarding the fire department, these two projects pretty much have been on the books and sort of almost taking a parallel path. It was the advent of our being able to get the grant, which we weren't sure we were going to get in as timely a manner as we did, that caused the library and the fire station to sort of come at loggerheads. It's not the city's fault. They happen to be next door neighbors. When this project first started, and there's certainly people, maybe not in this room, know that I preferred to add on to the current library. But it was explained to me in ways that I felt comfortable with, that under the requirements of the people giving the grant, we couldn't do that. So we had to go to the next plan. And the next plan, after many public sessions, was we want to keep the library downtown. So it ended up being where it's going to be. It's not that the public did not have an opportunity to speak. And it's good that they've had an opportunity to speak now, but I want people to speak intelligently and be mindful of how much work has gone into planning this library. And now we're here at this stage, and at the end of the day, getting half of it paid for by state money that you've already paid in. Now it gets to come back to us in the form of a very energy efficient 21st century library that it's a pretty good deal.
I would like to follow up, just to clarify. Do you believe that the library's size?
She hasn't
I'm so sorry,
answered.
Sheila.
I didn't know if you were clarifying the question,
Yeah.
or...
I apologize.
I was trying to be patient.
We'll wait until you finish.
So I've been a big supporter of building the new library, and I have spoken to several residents who are concerned about the size. And as Roxanne mentioned, this is a process that started years ago, and people had an opportunity to weigh in. And I think it's unfortunate that some people felt like they heard about it too late, and sometimes that happens, no matter, no matter what the situation is. One concern that I have, though, is if we build a library for half the size, we're not going to get it for half the price, because there are fixed costs that are going to be involved. We're going to lose the grant, and we're going to lose that opportunity. So this is the plan that's been in motion this whole time, and I feel like it's important to follow through with that. This has taken years, and there have been a lot of people who have worked very hard on this. And I think to just throw that all away seems wasteful at this point. We're going to see what the residents want on November 5th, and however people decide, I will respect that, and we'll move forward the best way that we possibly can. Going back to the fire station, since both of my opponents touched on it, I do like to remind people that the fire station is not an excuse not to build the library, because if I'm mayor and the library fails, I would still build the new fire station, and it would still be it would be one of my first priorities, because they should have come out of that fire station a long time ago.
I want to just pose this question. Is the size of the proposed library based on national standards for a city of Greenfield size? Can anyone respond to that?
Yeah.
Do we have a 1-minute reply to anything anyone said prior?
So I will just rebut. I don't have the answer to your question. I would have to look that up. The fire department is absolutely a necessary investment. It is in need of our community. Our community must have a state-of-the-art fire department. But the other thing it must have is enough space in it that the city did a study to say that we need it. And to date, I have not seen any plan or even anything thrown out that it would be the correct size. In fact, I've seen the opposite, that it would not be built to the correct size simply to get it done, to get it out of the way of this library proposal. And that, to me, is a problem with planning. And that's the planning I'm talking about. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I don't know the national standards for a city this size, but as I mentioned, it's not just a city library. It's a community library for the county as well, and there's numbers to back that up. What I do know about the size is it was mandated to a certain extent by the folks who gave us the grant, whatever their name is, the Mass Library Board, short version. So they're the ones who said we can't build onto the back end of the library because for a lot of reasons, and they're the ones who dictated to a certain extent what the size of the library could be. They must have some basis upon which they made that decision, and it may well be based on national standards.
So later on in November, after the election, the city council is supposed to approve funding to get started on the plans for the fire station. This is something that we were supposed to have voted on several months ago, but one of our colleagues who's not present wanted to table it until after the election. And I think that, everybody who's sitting here at this table cares about getting the right kind of fire station for Greenfield that's going to serve our community and our firefighters and serve all of their needs. So I don't think that that's something that we have to worry about being a factor moving forward. I think anybody who gets elected is going to make sure that this planning process is going to serve our needs.
So I did attend throughout the spring, late winter and early spring, meetings of the Public Safety Commission and of the Planning and Construction Commission. And I feel very confident, based on those meetings, that the fire station plans are moving along at the pace that they're supposed to be moving along. And if I'm not mistaken, we have grant money that's studying the site, the current proposed site, and perhaps going towards some other types of money going towards the first engineering study. So the site, actually, in terms of money, if people are interested in how we do save money here, it was based on the fact that we own the land already. So we are not going to have to go out and buy land in addition to build the fire station. And there's very few other locations appropriate for the fire station in which the town owns that land.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question.
Roxanne, right?
I think it's finally my turn again.
I believe so. We've come all the way back. How would you make Greenfield attractive to both people, retailers, and manufacturers?
Well, there's any number of ways to do that, and I feel like we need to recognize the fact in terms of businesses that we need to cite here, that we only have a small amount of land. There's maybe roughly 100 acres of developable land in the existing industrial park. We do have the opportunity through a recent grant to begin to expand the industrial park, and that's working, so that will be great. So we have land that may be reasonably developable for folks who need a larger campus. For those who do not need such a large campus, we have abandoned and underutilized buildings that I believe through tweaks to and amendments to our zoning bylaw, we can make more attractive for mixed use and for businesses that don't need, such as software engineering, call centers, depending on the size of the call center, and many other types of businesses, knowledge-based businesses that don't need huge campuses and can go into co-work spaces, can go into abandoned and underutilized spaces. Our creative economy is one that I think we should absolutely focus on. It already represents 9.2% of our local economy, not just Greenfield, but of the county. And it already employs 2,930 people. So I think that's something that both has the benefit of making us attractive because we're creating an image of ourselves and an identity for ourselves that says we are one of the most creative and innovative areas of Western Massachusetts. Come see who we are. And then lastly, and I've been talking about this since I announced, we really need to focus on our location, the advantageousness of being at Route 2 and 91, the extraordinary capacity of internet service that we have, which is something unique to this area. And we need to also keep in mind that we need to continue to educate our workforce and attract businesses here that befit the area that we live in, whether it's farm and food production or high tech or whatever. We do have an issue, talked to some manufacturers, with our education of our students. We need to add and interest students at the high school level and beyond into going into manufacturing. So I would look to align a curriculum as best we can to attract them.
I've moved to Greenfield relatively recently. I mean, I've been here less than 10 years, and I think that there are things about Greenfield that are attractive, and I think that we have to get past this reputation that we have that I really don't feel like we deserve. When I first said that I was buying a house here, I had coworkers down at UMass who have not been to Greenfield since the 90s. Who think that this is some horrible place, and it's not. And I think that we need to stop focusing on that and start talking about the great things that we do have here. And this is a good place for people to come and raise a family. It could be a better place for people to come and raise a family if we can sort of modernize how we think about economic development. Most people my age don't work 9 to 5. They're not getting pensions. I mean, I'm lucky that I'm a union member, so I do have those things, but most people who are my age are working in the gig economy. So they're gonna need things like high-speed broadband, which we have downtown, but GSA hasn't built out to the outer precincts. And while we still do have broadband out there, they're paying a lot more for their internet access than those of us who are lucky enough to live downtown are paying. And that money came out of our tax dollars. We used, we had a grant that came from tax money that was supposed to benefit all of us, regardless of where we live, and now there's a certain group in the core who has access, and these other groups are being told, we'll get to you. So we need to expand that so that other people are able to, work in these kinds of economies. We have to make sure that we're taking care of our schools, Parents are not going to want to come here with their kids if they feel like our schools aren't serving them well. So continuing to invest there, making sure that people are not choicing out. We want students to stay here in our public schools. We need to make sure that they have something that they can do after school. My kids certainly don't want to hang out with me after school because they're teenagers now. I've had people mention to me that they'd like to see the teen center come back. And that was very popular. And we could bring that back if we planned it out right and make sure that, we've got a good project moving forward. Also, a skate park that's been in the planning phases for a long time, and we've been ignoring it for several years now. I know that the current plan is for it to be co-located with the fire station, and that would be built out to a public safety complex. And I think that keeping that in mind for our kids, those are the things that are going to bring in your new families, who bring in students, who bring in dollars from the state for our education funding. And it's going to help us become more resilient and sustainable.
So how to bring people, business, and industry. There's an answer for each one of those, and it's the same thing: affordability, affordability, and affordability. So you make it affordable for people to live here, you make it affordable for businesses to locate here, and you make it affordable for the industries to set up shop here. Residents over the last 10, or rather taxpayers over the last 10 years in a residential home have paid almost 25% increase in their taxes. Businesses have paid almost 50% increase in their taxes, and industry has paid 100% increase in their taxes over the last 10 years. So if you want industry, that can't be the segment that ends up doubling in the last 10 years their tax bills. So on my website, I had laid out ways that we could generate revenue to create the ability for us to bring in revenue from outside sources. Those would be things such as creating an ambulance service, which we have a strategic plan that is a draft that shows and says that this community needs to provide that and should do that, and it would be a revenue generating project. Further, I would implement the use of civil tickets through the police department, which what that does is it allows you to use that instead of a mass uniform citation. And when you do a mass uniform citation, you pay half of that money to the state. We could do a civil ticket, which is exactly the same for things like speeding or any other infraction that is a civil infraction, and keep 100% of that money in Greenfield. That would double what we make without doing anything different, without changing who or what we write citations for. It's just a different citation that doesn't have the state's hand in the pot. As for industry, we need to utilize our ability to foster growth through the use of tax increment financing programs, which allows for a new business or an existing business to increase the value of their property, their real property, and they get a tax break on that new amount. Not what they're currently paying for taxes, but the new taxes that they generate by adding value. And then what happens there is those businesses can continue to grow, get a little bit of a break, but we as the city get a net gain because we're not losing any tax dollars on what they were paying before they got the tax increment financing plan. And using TIFs in the way that they are meant to be used is what we need to do to generate and attract those types of businesses.
Great. I think I answered it. It's my rebuttal, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Just keeping on track. Actually, as far as our internet service goes, and I do think that is a good draw, certainly affordability, and we have relative affordability, is too. But as far as our internet service goes, GSAT's just about, it's built out in the core. So it is moving to the outer districts. And if I'm not mistaken, we already are serving 1,200 people. We're going to be breaking even by Q1 2020. And we're going to move further out Bernardston Road and Deerfield Street and Meridian Street. And I have no doubt that they will come up with a plan to work with commercial rates before too long.
Yes, I would like to add on. I do agree with my opponent's idea of using TIFs to sort of incentivize these things for businesses to come in without us having to lose any of that tax revenue. But I do think that it's important that when we're offering these TIFs, we're offering them to the sorts of positive businesses that we want to see. Because it's not just about economic development, it's also about community development. So we want to make sure that if they're coming in and they're bringing jobs, we want these to be good paying jobs so that people can afford to live here in the community and that they're welcoming to all of our neighbors.
Just really quickly touching on relative affordability. That's exactly what we are, is relatively affordable. There is a segment of our population that is struggling significantly, and it's a rather large segment of our population. Our equalized value is very low when it comes to cities and towns, all 351 across the Commonwealth. Our tax bill, however, our average tax bill is on the other end of the spectrum. There's almost a 200-point difference out of 351 between what we can actually afford and what we charge in taxes. And that is a problem. And that is only going to grow until we turn that tide by increasing our tax base. And increasing our tax base means that we must bring in these businesses, and it can be any business. I will not sit here and say that I will pick and choose what business will be here. We need business, and we need a tax base increase.
All right, let's move on.
Your turn.
Has the recent reassessment by John Andrews changed your opinion on the accuracy of the 8.6 renovations? Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, I disagree with the framing of the question because I was already in support of the library. So it's nice to see that his assessment shows that we were on the right path. So I do appreciate that, and it is good. If you've got, something that seems like it might be too good to be true, then maybe you do want to have it double checked. So I do appreciate the information, but it didn't change my opinion because I was already in support.
I have not seen his assessment, so I can't give you an answer to that question. I believe it was in the paper, is that correct? Was it sent? So yeah, I have not seen his actual assessment, so I can't comment on that. However, what I can comment on is, as the Building and Construction Committee, they hadn't even reviewed any of the plans as of the last vote for the library when it first came to council. And I would think that the Planning and Construction Committee would be just that, planning and construction, and it hadn't been utilized in that fashion. So I'm not sure, again, what the assessment, is that was done, and I can't comment specifically to that, but I would comment that as mayor, I would make sure that the Planning and Construction Committee was doing what the Planning and Construction Committee was set up to do.
I believe that the library question has been asked and answered here this evening. I am a supporter of the library, as I said, very proudly, and have said all along. And yeah, I think that renovating the current library is good money after bad for a variety of reasons. And I don't think that that's a good use of the taxpayers' money, to spend money that isn't really going to get us the return on investment that we need for a library. So I appreciated John's input. He is a member of the Planning and Construction Committee, and he is a construction guy. He knows generally what he's talking about. So it was appreciated by me. But in agreement with Sheila, it didn't change my mind. We need a new library for all the reasons that we've been examining here for several months now.
Thank you. Good. I'd like to move on to the next question. What are your plans if we hit the 2.5% cap on taxes? How would you deal with this?
Well, there's only one way to deal with that. You have to have an override. And that is an override that's, well, actually, let me rephrase that. You have to have an override if you want to continue to raise the taxes. However, if the override fails, you must cut. That's a point where you don't have a choice whether you're going to cut. You will cut. It has been my opinion through deliberative studying of the numbers of our financial picture that the two projects that we have on the table, the library and the firehouse, coupled with the other issues that we have facing us in the infrastructure needs, that we will likely, if we don't generate significant outside revenue, in 2027, we will likely need a 2.5 override to fund the operating budget because we will have spent too much money. Because when you bond money, that bond payment comes from a line item within the budget. All bond payments are paid out of the budget, out of multiple line items. And when those line items increase, you either have to cut another line item to keep the budget the same, or you need outside revenue to create the dollars needed to pay for that increase, or you need new growth. In the last 10 years, we have not had a year that was over 800,000 in new growth. This current year is 275,000 in new growth. Well, that doesn't generate a whole lot of tax base. So those are the options that you have. So if we get to the point where we hit 25 per thousand, which is the state limit as to what you can tax, you will have to have an override. And I believe, and I see plenty of nodding heads that disagree with me, and that's fine, we can disagree. I believe, based on the 19 years that I have served in the capacity of Ways and Means Chairman and the capacity as Council President, in the capacity of looking over 19 years of budgets and doing 10 years of history based on the revenues and the expenditures, that these, given our situation and our equalized valuation as a city and what we can afford, that it's dangerous to do this. It's very dangerous, and that is my opinion. And there would be no discretion as mayor. It would be a 2.5 override if you get to that point.
Let's have a little faith here, folks. All three of us have been sitting up here telling you tonight that we intend to increase our tax base. So it remains to be seen, certainly. But at the same time, with regard to the debt structure, two bond rating agencies, two very well-known, well-respected international bond rating agencies have said we have the debt capacity to handle this. That said, we would never want to go to a position where we have to do a 2.5 override. And we're not that far from it. So it behooves us, whoever is mayor, I certainly hope it will be me, naturally, and to practice fiscal sustainability and to mind the budget in such a way, all of the stuff that we've been talking about, that we will not hit that 2.5 override. But if we do, and you don't accept it as voters, that too remains to be seen, should that come to pass, and I hope it doesn't, that we would have to cut. And that's when each and every one of us is going to have to figure out what if we're going to involve you in the budget process from the get-go, then each and every one of us is going to have to figure out where we want the pain to come from. So let's have a little faith that we're going to grow our tax base, that we are a city with a bright future, and that we are also very resilient. And if Greenfield has not proved anything else over the centuries, it has proved that it is a resilient community and it can respond.
So I'm also less concerned about a Prop 2.5 override. If it does happen, then obviously that's going to be a community conversation, and we're going to have to talk about what this means for us. We're going to have to talk about whether or not we want to support an override or whether or not we're going to make cuts. And I think that just not really understanding what could be happening in 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, it is hard to, sort of conceptualize that. And all I can say is just, if we're transparent, if we're responsible, and if we always know how our money is being spent, and it comes down to it because of an emergency or something that's outside of our control, then we just have to trust that the community is going to band together, and we're going to make sure we do what's right for Greenfield.
The more the debt goes up, and the more that line item rises, makes it more likely that at any point, should you need to cut, you would be cutting services and personnel, because you can't cut the debt line. You can't do that. You owe that money. So that needs to be factored in when we decide to raise that line item based on spending. You have to know that the reality is, if something needs to be cut down the line, it's going to be a different line item. You can't then just cut the debt line item. I do have faith in Greenfield. I have faith that Greenfield will elect somebody who is fiscally responsible and who understands what is the needs of the community versus things that we just want to have. So I do have faith, and I have faith that Greenfield will ultimately make the right choice. Thank you.
Are we taking a break in between now and 8 o'clock? I just was curious. We'd talked about it before, or at least we'd talked about it before.
I haven't heard about it.
Okay, that's all right. I just wanted to know.
If we need a break, if someone needs a 5-minute break, then
I'm good.
you would like one?
No, I'm good to go. I just was.
If we are going to take a break, I would like to wait, in between questions, and I did want to respond to that one.
Okay.
But it's your turn to respond first.
I think I answered the question. At the moment, I don't have a response.
Okay, so I would like to respond and just say that, we're never going to cut our way to prosperity. So if there's an emergency and cuts need to be made, then we're just going to have to deal with the emergency. But as far as long-term planning, when we're talking about our long-term survival, we really need to focus on what we can develop, not focus on what we can cut. Because when we're talking about cutting services and personnel, it's not just services and personnel of the residents. This is somebody's job, and these are people who have worked for our town. They're our neighbors. So that's something that's not a decision that should be made lightly.
The mayor has an important role with FRTA. How do you plan to utilize that role?
I think it's you.
So yes, the FRTA is very important because, as I stated before, we have a large segment of the population who needs that service. That service is important to a lot of people. The first thing I would do is not evict them from their building without anywhere to go, which is the plan at this point, as far as I know, for the firehouse when it has to be moved for the library. Whether that's changed or not, I don't know, but that was the last that I had heard about what the plan would be for moving the fire department to build a library. So first thing is, let's not evict them without a place for them to go. Further, moving forward, partnering with them to make sure that we have public transportation from the center of town to the outskirts of town to Leiden Woods, which we already have, but making sure that we continue to offer that. And also trying to potentially expand that if it's available. I've heard from some constituents that they have a hard time getting from here to Miller's Falls or Turner's Falls at certain times of the day. I'm not gonna sit here and say that I can take over the FRTA and figure out how to make the FRTA routes better, but it is something that we would definitely need to foster as a community to make sure that the most vulnerable among us are able to get to where they need to go most reasonably when they need to get there. So obviously, since it's not a truly city-owned transportation authority, we need to work hand in hand to make sure that we provide that we foster them to be able to provide the best service that they can and the best routes and times that they can provide it.
Me? The mayor has a definite role to play on the FRTA. First of all, we provide a lot of money to the FRTA, which services 41 cities and towns, or 41, cities and towns in the area. So when we pay our fair share, we are actually subsidizing places like Southampton, because we are the biggest subsidy. Our payment is the biggest there is. So we have to use that money wisely. One of the things that the mayor can do, and which I would do, would be to appoint someone who actually uses the transportation services to the FRTA board or commission, I forget what it's called. I've had lengthy conversations with people who actually use our transportation and rely on it to get around. And that is one of the things that they have asked for. And they will get it under my administration. The other thing that we can do is absolutely find the funding for weekend and night transportation to through the FRTA. And I don't pretend to think that that's going to be an easy thing to do, but it will certainly be a priority of mine, and here's why. It not only means that they can get from the outer areas, folks in Leiden Woods and other folks, probably even as closer to town, Oak Courts and so forth, people who rely on transportation. It doesn't just mean that they can come into town on the weekends, which is very important, but it means they can actually get to work. They can have a job. They can have a job that works at night. They don't have to juggle, rides or something like that. And it also means that they get to be enfranchised if they want to serve on town boards, or if they want to come to town meetings where their very important voice can be heard. It gives them an opportunity to come to those meetings, which are held mostly at night. So most definitely, I will be a strong advocate of increasing weekend and night transportation and making sure that Greenfield has its adequate voice on the board.
So I've also been approached by someone in particular who was asking about getting a rider onto the board. And we were talking about how important this is. And I know when I was younger, we relied on public transportation because we didn't have a car until I was a little bit older. And the services that we have here don't really match up with people's schedules, which is a big problem. I cannot take the bus down to work and back because it doesn't match my work hours. And I don't need to rely on public transportation. I would like to, but we have other people who now, they either need a supervisor who's going to be willing to change their schedule for them, and that's not always a guarantee, or they just can't work at that, in that area. And with so many people commuting from here to Northampton, we have, UMass is a big employer for us, and also Yankee Candle. If people can't get to those jobs, then they're stuck here, not stuck here, but it limits their opportunities. And if they're, here and they're not able to find something beyond maybe a minimum wage job, then they never really get dug out of that hole. So I think that advocating for night and weekend service is going to be important, but also having more routes and more direct routes to some of these major employers, like the industrial park down in Northampton, possibly Yankee Candle. But that's going to take a lot of advocacy work that's, going to happen outside of the mayor's office. So it's just going to be about like being a supportive partner and making sure that they do have someone with their best interests at heart on the board.
I would like to add that this whole transportation issue is a sleeping giant. It is a thing that you don't hear about much. We slowly but surely over the campaign, I know I did, and Sheila apparently has expressed that too, have heard about it. But it is something that, in addition to that and the Sustainability Master Plan of Greenfield, we also advocated for and committed to being a more transit-friendly city. So we do want to, I love taking public transportation when I go to Boston or New York or any other big city, because one, I don't know where I'm going, and they do. And otherwise, I think that it's something that we should encourage. So the more we can do, the better.
Everyone's all set? No one else has anything to add?
Yeah?
Quick break.
Yeah.
A quick break?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
10 minutes, whatever.
We'll take a
Just a stretch.
5-minute break.
Who's keeping time?
Let's start with the
Okay.
next question.
You want to whistle or something?
All right, we're about to resume. If you could take your seats. Stay
Do
seated
you
a little bit.
support redistricting Greenfield Elementary Schools so as to reestablish Four Corners as the neighborhood school that reflects the diverse population of the neighborhoods surrounding it, including residents of Leiden Woods who are bused past Four Corners on their way to Federal Street?
Yeah, I've actually had a couple people talk to me about this because it feels like it feels unfair that certain children get bused further and they have to go past a certain school so that they can get to the other school. And I know that there are some parents who really want to keep it the way it is. I was actually talking to someone over this weekend about the idea of just breaking up the schools and having like a kindergarten through second and then a third through fourth, and to see if that maybe makes more sense. I think that the way that we're doing it right now is unjust because we do end up with, even though our population is very, very white, we do have more children of color going to Federal Street School than the others. And so it does seem like we want to make sure that the resources are all being spread around for all of the kids. But I'm thinking more along the lines of changing them by grade so that they're all in the same building. This is more what I'm thinking of.
So by virtue of being the mayor, you are a member of the school committee. And this really, if the question is, as mayor on the school committee, would I? That's how I'll answer it, because I think that's really what needs the answer. And in my opinion, that is a very, very, not a long process, but the process to think about moving schools, changing districts, potentially upsetting what is going on now with the children and where they are comfortable and feel safe going. You have to be very careful. I was on the council when there was a change to the middle school and the high school and some of the elementary schools, and it wasn't necessarily smooth, and it caused quite a bit of turmoil with parents and children and teachers. And when we talk about changing schools, I don't think it's an answer that can be given in a 3-minute response, but that always looking at ideas on the school committee is part of what the school committee is for, as well as setting their budget. But as a member of the school committee, by virtue of being the mayor, yes, I would absolutely look at any plan that comes forward, but you would have to make sure that that included the parents, the teachers, the administration, and you look at it and it's a thoughtful process. So absolutely, as mayor, interested in thoughtful process when it comes to any sort of any sort of possible redistricting.
Well, I happen to have the distinguished honor to have been the only candidate here who has served on the school committee. So the discussion of how to make sure our elementary schools are there for all elementary school students in a way that makes sense, and neighborhood schools have always been, in my mind, a good thing. We've gone round and round about that over the years for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it can be because we are renovating a middle school and we have to make drastic changes about where to put people. Sometimes it can be philosophies of education and how best to ensure that we have students in each school apportioned properly. I mean, we have the Early Learning Academy at North Parish. Once upon a time, when I was on school committee, North Parish was a regular elementary school. We didn't have an early learning academy. The Early Learning Academy is an extraordinary, that would be the school that's closest to Leiden Woods, i.e. its neighborhood school. It would be, and others, Oak Courts, it would be a shame to have to move the Early Learning Academy or get rid of the Early Learning Academy in order to do that. So I think that it's a good thing to think about. I do have had people ask me about that as well. So I don't know if it's part of something the school committee is thinking about. I think it's always very good to create an atmosphere where schools are equitable, the education programs are equitable, and that we're have a very diverse community in each school. They're all going to end up at the middle school together at some point and at the high school. But I think it's a good idea that they carry out their socialization and their friends and their whatnot from grade school to middle school. So yes, I would definitely take a look at that if it became something that we could do, and do it in a way that addressed all of the needs of the children and the needs of our education program.
All right. We're all good?
I'm done.
This kind of goes along with what we were talking about, that the context for this is the current contract negotiations. The mayor offered a budget much lower than the school district asked for, and then has forced the schools to struggle to make do with less than it needs on a yearly basis. What role does the mayor play in this budgeting process, and how would you approach this?
Excuse me. So obviously, I was on the council for 19 years, and therefore the last 2 years where we had the ability to add money to the school, well, put back money into the schools, add money to the schools, because the mayor's budget comes to us and then we added money over and above what the mayor had asked for 2 years ago, and then we added back half of what the schools had asked for this past year. And I led a lot of the discussion on that option and the ability to do that. What I would propose, and I believe that it is a widely agreed upon option, is to do an audit of what we spend in our schools and make sure that either what we're spending is appropriate or it's not appropriate. and by appropriate, I mean enough. And if what we are spending it on is what we should be spending it on. So we do that audit to make sure, or to tell us that we are doing our best or we're not. Because it has been relatively unsustainable the way that it has gone with school funding up until this year, where we got extra money, well, not extra money, but the state gave us more money, $1.6 million or so of extra money to put into the schools, of which almost none of it filtered down into the schools based on fixed costs of health insurance, pensions, and all the other fixed costs that we have for our employees. So when the state gives you extra money and you don't put any, well, you put very little of it directly into the classroom, it makes this, I would assume that it makes the state wonder, well, what's going on here? We gave you extra money so that you could have more money in the classroom, and you took it and spent it on fixed costs, which are an issue. So I think an audit, now more than ever, is the best way to try to figure out and come up with a good picture of where either more is needed, or where less is needed, or where we need to shift from one place to another. We need that information so that we can make the right decision based on what the needs of our community are.
You, me, you.
Is it
you
me?
go. I think it's
Okay. So I've been saying for a long time that I don't feel like the way schools are funded right now is adequate or just. I think that this needs to come from the state. And I've worked very hard with my union colleagues to do this. I'm a member of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, and we've been working on the Fund Our Future campaign for almost a year now. Not that this is the first iteration, but and we did win back some more money, and part of that is because people have been making a lot of noise saying to the state and say, you know, that we need this because this isn't sustainable, not just for Greenfield, but we see this, you know, with our neighbors. Western Massachusetts is rural, and we're not population dense, and we're not wealthy. And all of our schools have struggled, and they struggle more than in communities like Cambridge or Newton, where they have a dense population and they have more wealth. So rather than let, you know, the state just kind of leave us to fend for ourselves, we need to advocate for more money to come back here. And I'm glad that some more money did come back this year. I don't think it was adequate, and I was disappointed that it didn't all go into the classroom. But to continue to have that conversation and make sure that out in Boston, they're not forgetting about us, and making sure that they understand that our children deserve a good education just as well as anybody who lives out east. That's going to be key, because if we keep funding our schools based on property taxes, then poor communities are going to have poorer outcomes for their students, and that's not giving them the chance that they deserve as they make their way into the future.
Again, having had the experience of being on the school committee, however, not having ever been a mayor before, I do understand the role between a school committee's advocacy on behalf of as much money as they can get in their budget for all of the things that we need. I crafted 6 budgets during my term, not by myself, but with my colleagues, because that is one of the most important roles of the school committee. And so I do believe that a mayor's role can be to keep open lines of communication as a member of the school committee, keep open lines of communication on what the concerns and what the needs on, for lack of a better term, town side. It's all towns. The schools belong to the town too, or the city. On the city side, but at the same time, I think the mayor needs to be straightforward about the budget needs, about what's coming down the pike, and at the same time, the mayor also needs to be a strong advocate with the state for getting as much Chapter 70 funding and other types of step funding as we can get. And then utilizing that money for the classroom, for the students, as much as possible. So, and being mindful that our teachers and all of our staff people also deserve to be paid living wages and deserve to be acknowledged financially for the extraordinary work that they do. It is an incredible balancing act, because that is also true of other departments. So I think the role of the mayor is very important, both as an advocate for the town, an advocate for the schools. And I certainly remember going to the State House advocating for money as well as a member of the school committee. So I'm pleased that $1.5 billion has been allocated by the legislature. It will be good when some of that money trickles down to us, and hopefully it's more than a trickle, maybe a deluge down to us. But it's good that the state is getting on the right track with funding. And I will be very cognizant of my role in a rural city to make sure that we are not forgotten and that all of that money doesn't just end up somewhere east of us. It's very important that we utilize the funding that we do get in a credible and a way that the students benefit from it. And they benefit both by having our teachers be well paid as well as money going into the classroom.
Would just like to say that we currently, in this past budget cycle, put $32 million out of $51 million into the schools. So we spend a lot of money on the schools, and we have great schools, and we have great teachers, and we have great students. So I always hate to have these discussions without saying that, so that people know, and people who live here know, but people who may be watching this from afar, if there are any, need to know that we do have great schools, we have great teachers, and we have great students, and we do spend a significant amount of money on education, but you can always, anything that's great can always be improved upon.
Right, now, I would like to acknowledge that, the city council did come together, people who don't always agree on everything, and we did try to do the very best that we could. And, and it was difficult. We had to make difficult decisions. So I don't want to disparage what Brickett's saying here, but I think that, as much as, that $32 million budget out of 51, it's still not adequate, and I think that we need to make sure that Boston really gets that message loud and clear. And that's going to take people, not just teachers and not just parents, but also city officials advocating and saying that we need this for our town, so that we can continue to spend this money on these other areas that also need this extra support too.
I just want to also add, I'm wondering too, and I don't know it for a fact yet because I didn't sit on the school committee this year, but I'm wondering too if we are using all of our resources. It is my understanding that perhaps we're not utilizing the Medicaid reimbursements the way we should. I don't know. They're intended, and it's a significant amount of money, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it is intended to go directly to the schools and be utilized in that way. So I want, as mayor, to understand how we're utilizing our other resources other than what we get from the taxpayer.
We're ready to move to the next question.
I think it's back to Roxanne, right?
I think I get the next question.
I think so. What do you think that you can bring to the position that others haven't?
Oh, well, good question. I think I've sort of indicated that over the evening. I am a former member of the planning board, 16 years, 14 as chair. The planning board basically deals with economic development and residential development. What happens when we authorize permits means that a business gets to go forward. So we have a keen understanding of economic development and how important it is to allow businesses to come into this town, whether they're the small business that has to come to the planning board for a permit or a very large permit. They come in under our rules, and that we apply those rules fairly. That's really all they want. They may want more, but I just mean when they come to us, they want to know we're applying the zoning bylaws and the permitting process fairly. And so that's important. I'm also, as I indicated, my experience on the school committee, I think, gives me a leg up in understanding how the schools work. And above and beyond that, I'm pragmatic. I'm good at, I spent a lot of time managing teams in my professional life, so I value expertise and I value the ability of our departments and the experts to do their jobs and to the expectations that I set, and when they need and to use all the tools that they have, and when they need tools or when they're hitting a problem, I need to know about it. So again, communication, working as a team, those are the ways that I approach management and leadership, and I really like to be able to do that. Keep going.
So I feel like I grew up the same way a lot of people in Greenfield did. I started off in poverty. My parents were on food stamps and welfare. My dad worked in manufacturing, and his company closed down, moved to Southeast Asia. You know, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and we struggled so hard. And I had to watch my parents decide between the electric bill and the cable, and, you know, we didn't have cable for a long time. We didn't have a car for a long time. You know, I got pregnant with my oldest son right over there when I was very young, and he's a great guy, and I'm glad I have him. But I struggled when I was young. I had to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I served in the military for 8 years as a Russian linguist. I mentioned that earlier. And I've worked in high-pressure environments where everything I do has to be right. And there are no chances for excuses. And if you make mistakes, you better have a really, really good team that you trust who's going to help you cover that, because you just don't get to make those mistakes. The stakes are too high. From there, I went on and I've got my master's degree in public policy and administration, where I've been studying things like homelessness and poverty and domestic violence and, you know, all these different areas that feed into things that happen here in town. When I was in the military, I managed programs for my commander in a classified environment. I had to make sure that every single workforce was ready for inspection when the inspector general came. And it was serious business. There was no messing around. I've been a leader of my union, where I've got nearly 1,000 members. I have more union folks counting on me than we have employees in town, both the town side and the school side. And I've been doing that as a volunteer while working a full-time job and taking care of my family. I'm able to work in high-pressure environments. I'm able to work with a wide range of people and interests, and I'm a consensus builder. I work really hard to try and find the right solution for as many people as possible. And sometimes that doesn't mean that I win, but I'm able to take it on the nose. I'm able to compromise with people, and I don't have to be right all the time. And I think that that's what I bring into this.
I bring a vast knowledge, a long 19 years of experience. I've been on the council with left-leaning councils. I've been on the council with right-leaning councils. I've been on councils I've been in charge of. I've been on councils that I have not been a committee chairperson of. And I've been able to work well with all of them. I've been on every subcommittee of the council, so I know how the subcommittees work. I know what the subcommittee's duties are. I've been on the other side, obviously, being on the council from the mayor. I've been on the other side, seeing what comes to us, how it comes to us, and it makes you sort of understand what you could do better, or things that maybe you think worked very well. So I have that knowledge and that experience. Outside of that, I've been a member of the fire department call force. I graduated from the police academy with Greenfield as a sponsor. I was an EMT, or am an EMT rather, taught EMT at the college level for many years. I coached the girls' soccer in the Greenfield High School for 6 years. So I've been in a lot of these departments that the mayor will have to oversee. I have been involved in the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the board that if someone appeals a decision of the planning board, they go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the Zoning Board of Appeals hears that appeal and makes the decision on the issue. It's also the appeals board for the building inspector. If the building inspector does something that someone feels is outside of his bounds or her bounds, that we hear that appeal as well. So I've been on that. I was a member of the 2010 Charter Review Committee, which looked at the entire charter and suggested what changes should be made in the committee's opinion. And I believe all of those changes were adopted. There might have been one that was rejected by the state, but for the most part, almost all of the changes that the committee decided to make were adopted. So it's really the knowledge, the experience. I'm the most fiscally responsible, I believe, member of the council, and I would bring that fiscal responsibility with me to the office of mayor, and that is probably at this point one of the most important things that we could vote on as a community.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else to ask or say? Prior to our 1-minute closing statement that our candidates will give, I would just like to thank each of you for your extensive knowledge and for the passion you have that you offer the community. I'd like to thank the community for everyone being here, because I know you'd probably rather have on a bathrobe or fuzzy slippers than watching the movie. Yeah. And also Greenfield TV for serving the community and recording all of this valuable information. So let's give a hand to our candidates first. And we will begin with our 1-minute closing statement.
I'll be begin down here.
Sure.
I don't mind, I
Rough
want
draft?
to.
I'll go.
We didn't decide in order
Yeah,
at
we
the end.
didn't.
We really decided it for the beginning.
Well, I appreciate everyone taking the time to be here tonight out of their busy schedules. I'm sure, again, people would rather be elsewhere. I am here for you. I have been here for you for 19 years. This is a passion of mine. It is public service for me. It's not politics. I want the best for Greenfield. We don't always have to agree on what that is, but we need to be respectful and understand that everybody has different opinions and that everyone's in it for the best interest of Greenfield. On November 5th, I would ask for your vote as a write-in for mayor. It's Brickett Alice, 300 Wells Street, in the write-in section on the ballot. Again, rich or poor, you want your tax money looked after, and you want to make sure that it's going where it needs to go. And I make the promise to make sure that your money is spent the same way I would spend mine. Thank you, and I ask for your vote.
So my name again is Sheila Gilmore, and I'm also asking for your vote on November 5th. I'm really excited that we only have a week left now, and I'm sure that my colleagues here are also excited. We're all going to get some sleep next weekend. If anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to me. I've given you my phone number, I've given you my email. If you want it again, stop me afterwards, and I'm happy to, meet you. We can have a cup of coffee or beer. We can talk about whatever it is you want to talk about if your question wasn't answered.
And again, thank you to Tammy, been an excellent moderator, and to GCTV, and to the audience who did a great great audience. So thank you for that. As mayor, I always want to keep in mind it's not about the title. It's about the people that you serve. And as mayor, I intend to serve all of the people. I may not have been elected by all of the people, but I will serve you in an open and transparent manner and with an open door. I'm ready and I'm prepared to lead this city for the next 4 years, and I'm asking for your vote on November 5th. Thank you.